Well, I am going to go ahead and get the show rolling since we've got a decent number of attendees here, and I don't want to take up any more space away from our incredible panel. So for folks who are in the room and aren't familiar, Slow Food USA is a food justice organization that strives to create a world where all people can eat food that is good for them, good for the people who grow it, and good for the planet. We cultivate nationwide programs and a network of local chapters. We host educational events like the one we're having today, and as well as advocacy campaigns, and we build solidarity through partnerships. Together, we are all working together to dismantle oppressive food systems to achieve good, clean, and fair food for all. If you want, you can learn more about us and become a member at slowfoodusa.org. Now let's focus on today's Slow Food Live event. The Food and Farm Policy Steering Committee, which hosted today's event, is a group of slow food leaders interested and engaging in the role policy plays in shaping our food and farm systems. This all-volunteer team, along with our amazing policy coordinator, Erin Kelly, have curated today's event, and it's going to explore the slow food take on the huge spectrum of meat options in today's marketplace. Now I want to introduce our moderator and our host for today's conversation, Peter Hoffman. Chef Hoffman is the former chef and owner of Savoy and Back 40 restaurants. He trailblazed farm-to-table cooking in New York City. His opinion pieces have been published in the New York Times, Edible Manhattan, and Food and Wine magazine. Hoffman served on the boards of the Green Market and Chefs Collaborative, and he's a Slow Food New York City Snailblazer Award recipient. On most market days, he can be found on his bicycle, foraging Union Square Green Market, and for the best in seasonal ingredients, and partaking in its Village Green community life. So now I am going to turn this table over to Chef Hoffman. Hello, welcome.
Have I unmuted?
Yeah, you're sounding great.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brian. It's great to be here and to be doing some thinking together as a group about this really at times confusing topic of meat in our diets, meat in the world, and I'm really thrilled that we have so many experts with strong and well-developed opinions about it to help us think about it. You know, we just heard Brian in reading some of the preamble, the ideas about slow food, about good, clean, and fair. And that's an important place that I think that we want to remember that that's what we stand for, whether we're actually members of slow food or just slow food adjacent. They're easy words to use, but they necessitate digging into some kind of knotty issues. And one of the things that he also said that I want to remember is that we should all remember is that we're looking for real long-term solutions to our problems, not just quick fixes, not fashionable fixes. Slow food tends, you know, when we look at what foods and what producers they've tended to celebrate is that they tend to not promote processed foods, not industrialized foods, but look for smaller scale, on the ground solutions to the challenges we face. And time and again, we've seen, whether in politics or in agriculture, that lasting solutions don't come from the top down. They've come from the term itself, grassroots organization. And so we're going to look at that a little bit today. What does grassroots actually mean when we're talking about meat? And but what's interesting is that now we have this new wave of what's being marketed to us as enlightened foods, foods that don't rely on animals, whether it's about cell-grown meat or alternate meats, as in other soy-based proteins, things like that. And so one of the questions we're going to dig into today is alternate meat part of the industrialized food system? Clearly, meat has a bad rap these days. People are making arguments for a vegan diet that climate change and methane production, world health, all of these issues we need to face given the dire circumstances that we're in at this moment. And of course, they also trot out the forever argument that we have to feed the world. But meat is a big category. And given all the different kinds and scales of production, and we're going to look at some of that. We have a producer on the call as one of the experts. So we'll hear a little bit about what smaller scale meat production can look like and how that can be effectively disseminated to our communities. Prior to the pandemic, the alt meats started, and as I said, the claims were environmental, climate concerns, and health, and we care about all those problems, and we're going to try and figure out how we fit into those today. But what I noticed is that, in a funny way, that maybe the food chemists or the marketers for the food chemistry have gotten us to open up to foods that are actually made in a lab, that are highly processed, highly industrialized, and they're framing it as the power of personal choice. And again, other people will dig into it in greater detail, but I want to just raise that as a flag for us to be thinking about. Is the problem of personal choice is a big one, and has the political ramifications are huge when we think that my free speech is mine alone, and that nobody should interfere with what I have to say. And here it's sort of morphing over, shifting over into the place of what foods I eat, and am I changing the world just by my personal choices? So, of course, there are plenty of stats that back up the ideas that meat is bad for the planet, bad for our health, and so we're going to dig into that. I guess the other thing that I want to look at and point out is that we're coming, are we coming out of the pandemic? We are, I think, but it taught us a lot. And it taught us, number one, that we still have global trade issues. It's being called supply chain disruptions. But when the global economy is disrupted in so many ways, even though lots of people are back at work and things are working, we haven't found our equilibrium yet. And just like rubberneckers slow down traffic on the highway, long after the car's been towed away, the residue remains. And that's where we're at. The food supply and the production of so many things is still disrupted. The other thing we saw, particularly in this country, is that meat packing plants, large scale meat production, was a disaster in terms of their willingness, their commitment to protect workers, because ownership didn't want to reduce profitability, slow down the production line, and create safe work environments. And so what we saw on the other side was we saw farmers markets, and I know this in New York at the farmers market that I shop at, all their businesses were way up. As much as people were frightened to go shopping, to be in the narrow aisles of the supermarkets in New York City, they went to the farmers markets outdoors and supported local production. And so we saw small producers and local economies thrive in ways that we hadn't seen before. And so those are some great steps out of all of this. So I'm wary of, which is, again, we'll get into what some of the problems are, but I'm wary of writing meat off completely. It's kind of taking the easy way out by saying meat is bad and we should be eating these other kinds of meat. But maybe more is about corporate monopolized meat production, where animals are seen as a commodity, traded at the lowest cost possible at the expense of other things that we care about, like environment, animal welfare, working conditions of workers. So my hope is that in listening to these five experts that we have is that you'll not only know more about the topic, but you'll be able to share with others who are promulgating some of these ideas where their thinking is flawed, where they've gone off track. And we need to be armed with this good information so that we can dig into these arguments instead of just having some hazy notion of, I see things differently and I'm making different personal choices. So I'm honored here to be here today with these five women who all know a lot about these topics and know a lot about them firsthand. One of them is Rae Gomes. She's a mother, writer, activist, organizer, and food equity consultant based in Brooklyn, New York. She's a founding board member and current board chair of the Central Brooklyn Food Cooperative, and she supports food sovereignty work locally, including working toward a Central Brooklyn food hub, and works in Brownsville, East New York Food Advisory Council. She's a community member of the Farmer and Community Advisory Committee for Green Market, and she was part of the 2021 Urban Design Forum Fellowship focused on food equity. Then we have Dr. Jennifer Cadenhead, PhD and RDN, and she teaches at Columbia University as a Goldberg postdoc researcher in food trauma at Teachers College. Food trauma in children at Teachers College. And Dr. Cadenhead's work focuses on understanding the relationship between diet, quality, the level of ultra-pasteurized foods that people are eating, public policy, and health outcomes. She also assists individuals of all ages addressing their assorted diet-related issues, especially among those in underserved groups or facing food insecurity. She's passionate about eating to address food sustainability and understanding the complex relationship between diet and health issues, particularly those which may be mediated through the intersectionality of genes and the human microbiome. And then we have Urvashi Rangan, Chief Science Advisor at Grace Communications Foundation, Chair of the True Cost Accounting Accelerator for Food, and the founding chair of Funders for Regenerative Agriculture. Urvashi is an environmental health scientist, toxicologist, public interest advocate, and investigator with more than 25 years of experience deciphering food systems, what a great word, to educate consumers, companies, government agencies, and philanthropic investors on the best systems to support. She is Chief Science Advisor to the Grace Communications Foundation and its programmatic site, foodprint.org, both focused on regenerative food systems. She's a spokesperson on the benefits of regenerative agriculture as a way to elevate the health of the entire food system and how organic production plays an integral role. And Katie Miller is a first-generation rancher in Colorado, presently owns and operates Heritage Bell Farms, a primarily pasture-based farm where she raises heritage breed livestock that include Texas Longhorn cattle, Navajo churro sheep, dairy goats, and poultry. And during COVID, she built an online virtual farmers market for her local Southern Colorado community, representing over 20 meat and dairy producers, vendors, and in her spare time, she's an inspector for AGA, the American Grass-Fed Association. And she'll be telling us about the power of regenerative agricultural practices on her particular land. So I thought a good place to start. I mean, great panel, right? I had nothing to do with pulling all these people together, but they did some good work, that committee. So bravo to them. I thought I would start by asking Ray to talk to us a little bit about that kind of uber level question of what are we getting wrong when we frame personal choice as a solution to environmental, social, or climate problems. You know, if venture capital is promoting these ideas and these products, are these solutions that we believe that represent real solutions? So what are we getting wrong about it, Ray?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. Thank you to Slow Food USA for inviting me to this wonderful panel of people I admire. So yeah, I love talking about framing. I think that is an essential part when we talk about policy in general. And so what we miss when we frame the problem as a personal choice is that we miss the opportunity to frame the issue in a way that gets to the root of it, right? So we take away the responsibility that governments have and the complicity that they have in creating policies that actually lead to food insecurity and a lack of food access in our communities. When you're talking about policies around food, you're talking about policies about the way people live. And so all of this affects how people access food. Redlining affects how people access food. Historical policy around giving tax incentives to growers, to farmers who grow corn, wheat, soy, dairy. All of this has affected the way that we access food because that food is abundant. All of those items, those commodity crops, they go into processed food, and therefore that is much more abundant than so-called specialty items. So we miss the opportunity to actually address the problem as it exists in the root of the problem, right? You know, what policies have led to wages being stagnant for the past 13 years? You know, who helps and creates the policy that affects our lives? You know, there are policies that influence the way that we live that we really need to address in order to really take it away from a personal choice framework and into a framework of a built environment. What possibilities are there for people to access good food, and why are those barriers existing in our communities?
So I think you were mentioning that you were working with a group for a while, and that some of the alt meats were coming into that people were eating them, and there was a discussion about one over the other and things like that. What do you think about the alt meat burgers in your community there in Brown? I mean, I don't know if you live there now, but I mean, you were working
Yeah.
in Brownsville. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was working in Brownsville and was told that folks prefer Beyond and not Impossible. And my response was neither. Neither of those things. You know, there's a lot of incentive in New York City to have what is being called a plant forward diet or plant forward focus on food. And so I come at it from a very systemic point of view, right? Before I give folks access to so-called alternative meats, do they have access to fresh fruits and vegetables? Can we start there, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we are promoting a plant-forward diet, we should be promoting the actual fresh fruits and vegetables that I think everyone can agree makes a difference in people's lives, particularly in diet-related illnesses and causes. So, you know, what Peter is referencing was that I launched a diabetes wellness center and, you know, would get, you know, a lot of opinions about things that should be served and things that we should have, you know, folks have access to, and what actually, you know, affects change in someone's life who's either living with diabetes or is high risk of it. But, you know, I worked with hospitals, I worked with clinics, And, I didn't want to come at it from a very, again, personal choice point of view. I wanted to come at it from what is accessible to folks and what does everyone agree that people who are living with diet-related illnesses need. And everyone agrees that it's fresh produce, right? It's fresh fruits and vegetables, whole grains and all of that. Everything else is just, kind of gravy, if you want to look at it that way. But, that was the bottom line that I was starting from.
Yeah, that's a great point for us to remember, that plant forward diets start with fresh fruits and vegetables. So Jen, jumping off from that, I guess that I have a couple of questions for you, but one is are these burgers healthy? Are the formulators going after taste and health? What is this stuff that we're eating?
Hi, Peter. Thanks for that question. I actually just put together a few slides just to, I think this will answer some of those questions, and if that's okay,
Sure.
share them. So can you see my screen?
Not exactly.
Sorry, let me just do a new share.
Yes, now we can. Yep.
Okay. All right. So these are my grandparents, my father's parents. We called my grandmother Mama Dola and my grandfather Daddy Monroe, because they didn't actually want to be called grandparents. They were married in 1919. She was 16. He was 20, and they were sharecroppers in the rural South, just in a town outside of Memphis, Tennessee, and Arkansas. They raised 15 children. It was a big task. But back then, eating meant planning. You had to put up your food for a year. My grandmother canned all of her food. It had to be organic because they didn't really have a choice. They had to use their chicken droppings and the cow dung and everything, because there was no fertilizer, not until after the war. Chicken truly was a rare treat. People in recent days have you can eat chicken every day if you want. Right after they got married, people, there was actually a big urban transition, and there were more people living in cities than there were in the countryside. And they started getting all of their foods from grocery stores, supermarkets. But my grandparents never really did that. They really actually just couldn't afford it. But around this time also, there were lots of products coming onto the market in the 1920s, 1930s. There was margarine. Later on, there were things like Chef Boyardee and Tang, and all of these things were tied to things like, scientific improvements, economics, it's going to benefit you economically, it's going to be healthier. They were saying margarine was healthier even then. But really, it was an economic thing based on the producers who were trying to get away with not producing butter. And then fast foods started rolling around, diners started rolling around. It was the cool thing to do. That's what the cool kids did. I remember begging my mother to take me to McDonald's, and my grandmother kind of going, tisk, tisk, who is it that deserves a break? But I was convinced that I deserved a break and my mother deserved a break. But meanwhile, the thing that wasn't said about these foods were things like, it wasn't just the 2 all beef patties. It was also the special sauce, pickles, onions, lettuce, cheese on a sesame seed bun that you ate with those 2 all beef patties, which we can get into how those were produced in a minute. And the problem with those, and still is a problem today, and my thing won't advance, is that if you look at the ingredients of these other side things that come with the burger, this used to be the formulation for the buns. All the things in red are what I would consider ultra processed products. And they've reformulated them to make clean labeling, but they're still ultra processed products. These buns are ultra processed. The cheese is ultra processed. The pickles are ultra processed. The sauce is definitely ultra processed. And, you know, my thing is that we are becoming an ultra processed nation. We consume about 60% of our calories as ultra processed foods. And my grandmother was seeing these things. She saw her children, her grandchildren, her great great grandchildren, all of these babies developing obesity, developing cardiovascular disease, heart failure, type 2 diabetes. It's literally killing my family members. And it's actually literally killing Americans as well. And the other thing is that no longer were my grandparents able to actually farm, although to be fair, being sharecroppers is not really the greatest job in the world. But now these foods demanded uniformity in all kinds of products. So you have monoculture being introduced, and you have these confined animal feeding operations, CAFOs. So not only are you exploiting people, you're exploiting animals as well. And the runoff it's not, you know, I'm sure the farmer can talk to regenerative agriculture, but it's not a conducive thing. And then if you think about it, what are the claims that alternative meats are now making? I took these from Facebook websites, but here we have Beyond Sushi and Impossible Burgers. And they imply, although if you look at their websites, they don't actually say this, that it's more convenient, that it's healthier for you, that it's more environmentally friendly, that you have to be able to have these things in order to feed the future 9.5 billion people that are coming on the planet. But then if you look at the actual nutrient facts, like let's just take Impossible Burger here. If you notice, there 1 4-ounce, which is very small portion of just that patty, has 40% of your daily value of saturated fat, 40%. And if you look at, if you compare that to like a typical hamburger would only have 25% of your saturated fat. It would have a portion, you know, you wouldn't get to 16% of your daily value of sodium with the burger alone. It would be a portion of that. And you certainly wouldn't get over 2,000% of thiamine, which is a B vitamin and it's water soluble. But I still, as a nutritionist, would never recommend someone doing that. And then you look at the ingredients themselves. It's an ultra processed product. Soy protein concentrate. And if you think about it, it's also relying on monoculture. And not only monoculture, other things too, which may not be the greatest thing, as you mentioned before, labs. So, you know, you have things like this. This is a bioreactor, which not necessarily true for the Impossible Burgers, but for the culture cell proteins that might be coming along and other animal-like proteins. There are lots of potential issues that might occur, which we still have yet to explore. So I guess the question would be, and my grandmother would ask, is it really worth it, to people? I think my grandmother would probably suggest that people just have a burger or a steak, but only have it occasionally. And as Ray mentioned, the most important thing is actually to, get some fresh vegetables, some whole grains, and enjoy it with your family. Have a garden.
Right. Great. Well, that was a deep dive. Jen, thank you for that. And I mean, I'm so glad that you did share sort of the family story with us, because it takes us all the way through the entire 20th century into the 21st century to this moment here, and puts it in great perspective. Like, it hasn't always been this way, and therefore there are choices that we're making, or there are choices that can be made, right? Because I'm not sure that we individuals are always making those choices, but systematically decisions have been made, and we're seeing what some of the trade-offs and the effects of those are. So it brings me into this wonderful moment here to ask you, Urvashi. Okay, We got a lot of meat production going on. There's issues with it on the planet. And one of the arguments that is being promulgated by the marketing is that by eating these alternate meats that it's better for the planet and we're going to reduce meat consumption. You told me the other day that's not quite true, that research shows otherwise, and that people really have, part of this is that people have started to view cows, whether they're dairy cows or for meat production, just as you called it tailpipe emitters, only looking at them as methane gas producers and not in a more holistic way. So what are we getting wrong with all of that? And do we need meat and animals for good agriculture?
Thank you, Peter. And thank you, Ray and Jen, for starting us off, because I think Ray and Jen did a great job sort of giving a lot of fundamentals as to what is wrong with this particular sector, why processed foods continue to be a problem, and why are we taking that to the next level altogether in the marketplace? And then why are we marketing them as the solution to what we need for food systems transformation? It's a little bit galling when you kind of think about it, although when you understand the intellectual property behind it, how many patents are on an Impossible Burger, I think, I don't know, dozens, 18, something like that, you kind of start to unpack why this is such a very interesting industry to certain investors. Other food doesn't have the IP that these types of foods have. And so we're not talking about tofu or things that are kind of traditionally fermented, you know, with a certain type of processing. We're talking about things that can't really be done by nature. And on top of it, Peter, thanks for teeing it up, but I'm just going to put it right out there. I think that there's a lot wrong with the current discussion around resilient food systems and how we get there. I think that people have pieced apart this very complex system and become very myopic on certain parts of it. And that has led to some really erroneous understanding, I think, confusing marketing, and there's good reason why we're all confused about it. So hopefully by the end of this panel, you'll feel like you have a little more clarity on that. I'd love to jump into a few slides too, because it is complex and it's easier to maybe talk about this with slides. You all can have these slides afterwards. I know this is recorded, so I won't go word for word. Some of these are dense, but I want you all to have this information because this is what we all need to know to be able to start to make some better decisions in the supermarket, but also, as Ray put it, in our society. What are we valuing in society, and where should our policies and food transformation systems be going? So I'm gonna also just share my screen. And I think it's up. Is it up?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So Peter, as you said, I just got back from the Cotswolds at a Sustainable Food Trust meeting, actually, on a ranch out there, and just really beautiful to see heritage breed animals, and ranging on pure pasture. There's no grain trucked in for these animals. There's no pesticides put on the range. Truly rehabilitating the land, building soil organic matter, drawing down carbon as a result, and increasing nutrient density. That's what animals do for the food system. And so to take them out altogether, I'll start with sort of misnomer number one is that they are absolutely part and parcel of our farming system. They can be a huge anathema if we do it wrong, which is what 95% of our livestock industry does. However, there is a good chunk of farmers out there who are doing the right thing. We've got Katie on to talk about that after me. And that can actually turn around a lot of things and is actually a net positive for nature, and can actually help build soil organic matter in order to sequester carbon. So let's jump into this. The first thing I just want to kind of tie up on the fake stuff is that Jen did a great job talking about the cell cultured meat. This is protein from a plant. This is the factory, the hexane, the energy that is all required to pull protein out of a plant. It doesn't just fall out of a pea or fall out of soy. You have to chemically extract this stuff out. The only folks that are really doing this at a scale level are the huge agrochemical companies that are also behind our industrial agriculture system. You basically they will extract these and purify them into powders. And while you're buying your fertilizer, you can also buy your pea protein powder in order to make into your formulated products like Beyond Burger and Impossible Burger. So this is the type of factory production systems that we have going on. Sorry about this. In these so-called plant-based products. And this sort of gives you a quick visual on what's happening in each case. The center one is the Impossible Burger and the genetically modified heme to give it a nice meaty taste. There's a lot of factory business going on in that. You cannot do these things out on a farm, out on the land. These all take place in a laboratory in sterile conditions, in a lot of plastic, a lot of energy, a lot of water. It's very labor intensive, not to mention antibiotics, cell cultured mediums that are actually made from fetal bovine serum and things like that. There's just huge issues with all of this kind of processing going on. Quickly, I'm not going to run down all of this, but I just grabbed.
No voy a revisar todo esto, pero aquí se habla acerca de los problemas que hay con los productos de.
Are we translating? Maybe that's what we're doing. Okay, so anyway, I'll just keep going. These are the various issues with plant-based protein products. These are the various issues with animal cell lab meat. So
Estos son los problemas
alluded to
con la carne que hay de animales en el laboratorio.
And the other thing people should know on cell lines is in order to immortalize a cell line, you have to transfect it with an oncogene. That's a gene that causes cancer, which would cause the cells to then reproduce over time. This is kind of crazy business.
Am I allowed to interpret?
That we would never harvest an animal that had cancer in order to eat its meat. Okay,
Wow.
so again, I've left you with a bunch of takeaways here, and I want to move on now to what is truly a very hopeful system. As a scientist, I can't tell you how excited I've been about regenerative agriculture and all of the myriad of benefits that it actually brings. This stuff that we've just talked about is not bringing you what you need. It is capitalizing on the industrial food system through the companies, through the type of farming, through monoculture, as Jen and Ray alluded to, completely doused in pesticides and other chemicals. This is not a sustainable food system. This is not what is going to get us out of the problems that we're in. And so what is going to get us out of this? How are we going to do this? You know, this is the approach we have taken in industrial ag, which is to take this sort of system from people down through soil and everything in between and parse it out and then deal with it each as its own compartment. We do this in policy, we do this in practice, we do this in business. This is wrong. The fact that we've taken apart this system has really disaggregated things in a very bad way that has very significant consequences. We are losing soil fertility. We are losing soil biology. We don't have enough pollinators to pollinate our food. And we really have a biological dysbiosis going on where we are actually creating a resistome rather than fostering our biomes. And that's from the soil all the way through to people that actually allows for things like pathogens and antibiotic resistant bacteria to proliferate. So these are literally direct results from the industrial ag system. These are often externalized costs that we do not include in the price tag of our food. And so, you know, what do we need to do to really recognize where the true cost of our food is, but also where the true value can be had? And that's where regenerative agriculture really ladders this whole system up in a different way, where soil starts first. And you basically have to steward the biology in the soil in order to create soil health. And that is maintaining its biome, the microorganisms in that biome. And microorganisms are important for a lot of things. They're not just sort of hanging around. They're helping getting nutrients from the soil into the plants. They're actually pre-digesting some of those nutrients so that the plants are better able to take them up. And what's fascinating about that is that those qualities of that soil biome actually apply to every single biome in the system, to plants, to the ecology, to animals, to us. And each of these parts of the system is taking the nutrients from the former and actually metabolizing them into forms that we can then uptake even better. Part of the problem today is we have a complete sort of lack of nutrient density in our food, and it's only gone down in the last sort of several decades. What is going on with our food? We are losing fertility in the soil. We are losing the ability of the soil to actually give up those nutrients. The other major thing microorganisms do is help to digest carbon matter to create and build soil organic matter. And that topsoil build actually starts to sequester carbon. So nutrient density, carbon sequestration, and soil fertility all exist hand in hand. And if you are disrupting one, you are disrupting the others. And all of these things are interdependent on one another. And when you start to segment these things out from one another, you actually disrupt the entire system. And that's what we've done today. So, you know, to kind of package it all back up, if you look at the myriad of benefits, it's so exciting to think about what regenerative agriculture can do when you don't use chemicals, when you use nature to control for pests, to control for fertility, to control for weeds. And you also start to get all these benefits of carbon mitigation. When you hear people say land use, wow, that's a really bad thing. You know, stop and think, like, we have to produce food. We live in places. So we've already developed a lot of our land. The question is, what do we do now? Now, we shouldn't deforest things, but what do we do with all the degraded grasslands that we have in this nation? The only way to regrade those is actually with animals. It's actually putting animals on the landscape in a managed way in order to build the soil. You can put them on in an unmanaged way, which is what has happened, and we can degrade those lands. So it's really about looking at the potential of our full system and the involvement of animals in a much more integrative way. And finally, I'm sorry, my text is off a little bit, but like the health of all these systems is completely intertwined with one another. You know, I know this will open up a lot of questions like, can we do it? Is it possible? Can you really raise livestock in a regenerative way? These are not theoretical questions. This is the subject of science today, trying to understand what it is we can do with what we do have and what we are able to understand. Will we be able to produce the volumes and volumes of meat we produce today? Maybe not, because it's going to take, it takes a longer time to produce better meat. But that said, we know what the right system is, and we don't need to be deflected from that question. The way to reform how we make our meat and dairy today is by actually reforming those systems to a more regenerative one. For folks who are interested in more, Fora, we just released a climate and regenerative ag report. We're releasing 11 more reports around regenerative ag and the benefits to water, to livestock, to communities. Because the benefits are really broad and real. And I think if we understand what direction we really need to go in, it may seem more complicated. It isn't as convenient, but it's absolutely the right way to long systems change. Thank you.
Yeah. Wow, Urvashi. Thank you. Thank you for that. As you said in your bio, a great deciphering of some very complex topics. And you teed up Katie beautifully. You know, you gave us the theoretical, and now we get to talk to Katie here a little bit about, you know, what's really happening on the land for you as a rancher, as someone caring about the soil and regenerating that soil. Was it degraded when you first got there? And what's your experience these days, Katie, as a rancher?
Yeah, thank you. So my journey in becoming a first generation rancher stemmed from me being raised in a city in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and just being raised to appreciate nature and ecosystems and getting outdoors. I grew up having a large family garden and learning how to preserve food and can and freeze and dehydrate. And so I was very much science geared and super concerned about the deforestation of the Amazon rainforest and how animals were being treated in CAPO. And for a moment in my childhood, I went so far as to try and become a PETA advocate and supporter. And fortunately, bacon lured me back in, but that's basically the beginning of my attempt to try and really, again, decipher how my food is being raised, where it's coming from, and how I can do my part to facilitate the type of agriculture that I believe in and that I want to support. And that's animals that are being raised humanely and cruelty free, and also organic vegetables and produce. And I'm just always been really concerned with what I'm putting into my bodies. And now that I have children, I'm overly concerned about what I'm putting into their bodies as well. And so when I met my husband and we had the opportunity to start a small farm, I had also been right in the midst of beginning and finishing my continued education in holistic land management and planned grazing. And so I was very excited to start implementing all the things that I had learned, but freshly out of college, I was super broke. And so I started out with the cheapest livestock I could get, and that was earthworms for my compost, and a whole bunch of poultry, mostly roosters, because they're super cheap at the factory hatcheries. And so I convinced my husband to build, we called it the Ark because it was a manufactured home trailer on the base of it. And we housed 1,200 birds in that and started implementing rotational grazing with poultry and chickens. And I was just astonished at the, let me see if I can get my slide to move forward. I was just astonished at the amount of impact I was seeing on the land just from poultry. And so slowly but surely, over a period of time, we were able to save more money and purchase larger livestock and utilize what I had learned doing holistic management to use larger livestock and to really benefit the land some more. And so we have gone through, we raise all heritage breed animals, Texas Longhorn cattle. Sorry, I'm not sure why my screen is not sharing, but Navajo Chora sheep, Nigerian dwarf goats, and our whole emphasis is basically to demonstrate regenerative agriculture and land stewardship and conservation by producing food that has integrity and also creates a local economy, but that's based around optimal nutrition and restores the ecological capital of our soils. Our land practices, again, I said we engage in holistic land management and stewardship of the land. And this means that we do not need the inputs, the outside inputs of chemical fertilizers or pesticides. Everything we do is very intentional in how we move our animals. We follow poultry behind cattle so that the poultry can take care of pests in the manure. We move our cattle so that they are onto fresh ground and never overgrazing. And basically just emphasizing the innovative management techniques, we're able to result in a very diversified business model that enables us to preserve our land, our livestock, and our livelihoods, and also our agricultural heritage that we all come from. way down the line.
So
Again, our
Katie,
model
when,
decreases the needs for outside inputs, and we increase our resiliency because of that.
right. Katie, I'm just curious, when you first got on the land that you're raising the cattle on, what condition was it in? Was it degraded? And what's it like now?
Yeah, so our land was not necessarily degraded. We kind of live in this urban rural corridor where a lot of inner city people are kind of moving to the outskirts of the city. And so we had a larger of what I would call kind of a smaller subdivided tract of land at 40 acres. And then just a couple of years ago, we were able to purchase an additional 120. So we now operate on 160 acres. But previous owners of our property were not farmers or ranchers. And so we're fortunate in that our grasslands and our prairies were virtually untouched, which is not necessarily a good thing either, because our prairie ecosystems have really evolved to be needing that herbivorous relationship on them in order to break down the carbon. So if you think about a couple hundred years ago, before we had fences, we had great herds of bison and elk and deer. And we also had a lot more predators than we do today. And so because of those predators in the ecosystem, those herbivores and those plant-eating herds were continuously moving to avoid being caught by predators. If they stayed in one location too long, they would basically desecrate what they're eating, but they would also be eaten themselves. And so through holistic land management, I have been taught how to use technology and tools like electric fencing to recreate the same animal impact that we would have on the land. So I use like a single wire electric fence that is able to consolidate and condense those animals down into a smaller area. And that's essentially the same thing that a predator would do in the wild. And that creates the animal to behave differently. It makes them kind of trample the land a little bit more. They're urinating and defecating on the land, fertilizing it, but then we're moving them off. So those grasses are allowed to regrow and regenerate themselves. And what we have seen is that we are actually increasing the amount of biodiversity on our land as far as plants, insects, birds, wildlife. And it's all because we're replicating the pattern of what the natural ecosystem was doing. And so for us, meat is absolutely a necessity as far as our goals of continuing to have productive land. And so without meat and without livestock and animals in our lives, our land, which has evolved over eras of years, would essentially defunct to becoming desertified and very much less productive.
Right. Great. Well, I'm so glad that you're out there doing what you're doing, and showing us the way that it can go, as a first timer as well. You know, I asked you this the other day, and just quickly, because I want to sort of do a final round of a question for everybody at the end. But you did say that your neighbors, some of their land is degrading, and I was just sort of wondering whether, do you think that they're looking at you and seeing that the grass is actually greener on the other side? And are you an inspiration to them as well as that you are to us?
Yeah, I definitely feel like I could be viewed as either an inspiration or a bit of jealousy. There is a hesitancy in a lot of kind of old timer ranchers that they don't like changing their ways. They don't like starting or trying a different way that they have been taught through their family. Their father, their grandfather did it this way, and so this is how they have to do it. And in that case, I'm very fortunate being a first generation farmer rancher because I'm very open-minded. I have not been taught the ways of the land by my previous generations. And so I'm able to put a lot more research into different models and figure out what has worked for other people. And I also have the ability to try new things, because a lot of times beginning farmers and ranchers don't have the infrastructure and the equipment to do things the way that they have always been done. And so we have to be really innovative in how we do a lot of things.
Right, right. Great. So, what I started to think about in this whole idea about that personal choice is not an effective means for bringing about change, right? That, I mean, again, we do have to make our personal dietary decisions, but we have seen, starting with what Ray was saying, is that the structural issues are really the beginning of how this whole thing gets shaped. And so, and slow food has traveled a path from beginning to be, in the beginning, maybe it was just like, let's celebrate great tastes and good food, to a place where there was more work and attention on injustice in the food system and all of that. And so I'm wondering, from where each of you sit today, what would you like to see people do around this issue to be more effective? In fostering good, clean, fair food beyond just what they eat and the food that they buy. So maybe we can go in the order that folks spoke. And Ray, what's your thought?
Yeah, I got a lot of thoughts.
I'm sure.
Just to, yeah, I think, from where you stand, there's a lot that you can do. If you are a community member, you really should start to be mindful of where you're getting your information from in terms of what is healthy, what is sustainable. I would definitely look at Urvashi's research, all of these fine panelists and the work that they've been doing as a great starting point for that. I've been pretty curious for the past couple of months, I suppose. I've been working on an article, it's in my head, about a lot of these documentaries that folks watch that are very easily accessible to folks, like What the Hell, Forks Over Knives, and there's a new one called They're Trying to Kill Us, where, there's a very sort of sensationalist take on what is healthy and what is unhealthy, and what meat is doing to us, and what chicken is doing to us, or folks who are like, well, maybe I'll just do seafood, and what seafood is doing to us. And there are, articles that debunk a lot of these claims, or at least, put them in perspective. And I think those don't necessarily make it to folks. And so, a lot of the times people are getting their information from there and not looking at it holistically, or not looking at it in the context of, these folks have a very vested interest in promoting veganism for various reasons. And then trying to see where else you can source your information. The problem with health is that, it's so complex and yet it's so simple, right? The things that we've been told to do, eating fresh fruits and vegetables, whole grains, and all of these things are not necessarily accessible to a lot of the communities that need it. And therefore, as I said before, putting it in a framework of personal choice will always be problematic, because you're asking folks that don't have consistent access to that food, whether it's through their income, whether through the built environment, to solve a problem that they did not create. So, again, from a sort of consumer standpoint, it sounds a little, do your research, but then also work to find ways to advocate for better ownership and ownership over the food distribution system. For policymakers, I just want to reiterate a point that Jen and Urvashi made, that, the promotion of alternative meat comes in a long line of policies that support processed foods. And so when you look at it from that standpoint and that framework, you do see that there's a lot of incentive to keep, promoting these types of food, because it promotes a status quo agricultural system. It doesn't shift anything, right? It doesn't address hunger. It doesn't address health. It just sort of builds upon the processed food and the type of profit-based agricultural system that we've had for a very long time. So, from that context, a lot of the claims that the folks make on it, about alternative meat, kind of, it complicates it a bit. And it also complicates it because, when you look on the boards, they're not nutritionists. They're not folks from the community that are on the boards. They're venture capitalists. So they're invested in this because it's profitable. And if they're invested in it because it's profitable, it's probably not going to be nutritious from what we've been talking about, what nutritious food actually, cost. And, Vashi obviously speaks a lot to that as well. But a lot of what I would like to see policy-wise is to address the sins of the past. There's so many ways that policies have brought us to the space that we are in now. I was just at a conference, the mayor's convening on health, hunger, and nutrition, and it's meant to be a precursor to the larger health, hunger, and nutrition conference in the White House that's happening in September. And I'm always just struck by these things, how, I go in the room and I see a lot of the people that I know, and it's sort of like the usual suspects in a kind of way. They're folks from, food systems, and they're folks from emergency food, and, they're folks from, nutrition and diet. And, there's, as Urvashi says, we all kind of got to talk together, but to a certain degree, there are people there who have benefited from the framework that has been ongoing for a very long time, namely emergency food. When people are trying to address hunger, they're trying to address it from the feed the need standpoint. And these are the things that need to shift. Solutions that come from the community. Communities don't necessarily want to see more food pantries. They don't necessarily want to see more emergency food. To a certain degree, they understand that is only a salve to the problem. They want to see more sustainable food systems. They want to see more foods that they recognize, foods that come from their own culture. These are the things that need to shift in order to actually create sustainable change in our food system.
Yeah. Great, Ray. We need to sort of look at the past and honor our cultures. I certainly underline that. I want to see if we can move through just a couple more comments, because we do have some questions and we're running out of time. Jen, anything that comes to mind that you want to throw into the mix here about how to get past the personal choice fallacy?
I would second a lot of the things that Ray has already said. Understanding where you're getting your information from, but also, our country was built on the labor of and exploitation of many people, and our food system still today is dependent on the labor of people who are exploited. So basically, it kind of comes down to, do we want to have a country, and I think this is consistent with Slow Food's take on it. Do we want to have a country where we're supporting people? We need actually jobs that pay people living wages so that people can be able to afford these things. But some of the other things that perhaps we don't think about is that who's benefiting from these policies and who's promoting these policies. I mean, I think Ray sort of touched on this, but fossil fuel companies have a lot at stake in terms of fertilizer depends on fossil fuels, being able to transport food, not having a centralized food system depends on fossil fuels. So much of it is revolving around that, and the people who are the lobbyists who are supporting those policies in Washington make sure that those things are promoted. So, understanding where the money is and who the money is going to is very important, and actually listening to people who have unbiased or fairly unbiased recommendations for your health, as opposed to, and actually understand the real nutrition, not just nutrients. You can't just take a vitamin and be good for life. You need to have like a whole diet to be healthy. So yeah. And the last thing I will just say is, getting a policy back in the school, having home economics be a course. Everybody should be able to cook at least one meal a week. And a lot of people are not even able to do that. I think even just starting there would be a great first start for many people.
That is a great goal. I love that idea. I want to take a try and take a couple of questions from the audience. One, and maybe Urvashi, you can address this in a short kind of way, but Julie wants to know about the term regenerative and whether it's being co-opted or who gets to sort of own the term, that regenerative, and are regenerative and plant-based the same thing, and plant-based is not inconsistent with regenerative. So are they vying, are pasture-based ranchers and plant-based advocates vying to own the term?
Yeah, great question. Regenerative right now is more of a discussion of kind of what is the ideal food system looking like? Where do we need to get to? So it's a bit of sort of vision setting at the moment, although there are plenty of organic farmers, for example, who are doing an amazing job, or Katie, who's on the line here, certified with American Grass-Fed, who truly are getting to that state of regenerative. At the basic level, if you're not building soil, you're not regenerating anything in your system. But regenerative has broader meaning. It's got a social arm to it. It's got an environmental arm to it. It's got a people arm, community arm, economic arm. So it's really about looking at the constellation of capital buckets, so to speak, and are we indeed putting capital into each of those buckets? Local economies and supporting local economies, to Peter's initial question, is actually a great way to start to move toward regenerative systems. Buying at your local farmers markets, getting to know those farmers. We have 265 of them here in New York City. It's amazing what you can find. We also have local distribution systems that have been doing an amazing job, and you can get that as well. Why isn't plant-based synonymous with regenerative? It's a great question, and I want everybody to just stop saying that word, plant-based, because what it is it is a ruse from the agrochemical companies to be able to qualify their product as a plant. I showed you the chemical extraction of plant protein. I showed you that this is not coming from, you're not harvesting a plant or what it's giving and putting that into the next item and then serving that. You are extracting it through a factory. You are getting the powder, you are purifying it, and about at least 60% of that plant, if not more, goes to waste. So you are wasting important plant material, that you are taking up carbon, you are taking up energy, you are taking up fertilizer in order to grow. This is nonsense. A plant should mean fruits and vegetables and legumes. And that's what a plant is. And if we could just all go back to saying fruits and vegetables and legumes, those folks who are creating this stuff wouldn't be able to call their thing a fruit or a vegetable or a legume. So let's not fall into these traps of commercial marketing. They're forcing us all to say, oh, I want to eat plant-based. Plant-based today can be good, it can be bad. It depends on what you're talking about. So let's not go into more vague and misleading terms to use to describe the food we want to eat. We know what we want to eat. Whole foods, minimally processed, produced well, and ideally local. And that's it. And those foods don't fit into that paradigm.
Yeah. Well said there, Urvashi. Thank you for reminding us of that really fundamental idea, and not getting all that gauzy words on top of it of plant-based. So I think we have one last question from Anna, which is an important one. What recommendations do you have in the world of institutional purchasing for those who want to decrease their dependence on industrial meat, like in New York City schools and other institutions? And I'm going to ask you, Ray, to just jump in on it, because that's something you've been thinking a lot about, and where the plant-based thing gets a little confusing. So how about decreasing industrialized meat in the schools? How do we do that?
Yeah, that's a big one. We're trying to tackle dairy. Institutional buying, there are a lot of policies that sort of shape how and why governments purchase food. from particular places. In New York City, we just adopted the Good Food Policy Plan, Good Food Purchasing Plan, GFPP, that has some underlying sort of missions in terms of what food we're purchasing. And so it promotes local food production, local food purchasing, regional food purchasing, purchasing focused on animal welfare, and some other good stuff. But there are a lot of states that are adopting this now. So it really starts with the policy, because most policy says that you have to purchase the sort of lowest amount, right? They have a threshold amount, or you really have to be competitive of where you're purchasing your produce. So if it's, or your food, any food items basically. And so if it's cheaper to purchase from, you know, from, I don't know, I think people were getting food from Czech Republic for some reason. They're getting meat from there. And during the pandemic, it was like, I guess it's cheaper to purchase the meat from there than it was to purchase it from a New York State based farm. And so, you know, in a lot of ways, logistically, that makes absolutely no sense. But because our food system, as Jen said, is profit based and profit minded and focused on maximizing profit, our government purchasing practices aren't that different. And so if they're prioritizing profit over logistics, over supporting your regional economy, then you would make those decisions. And so wherever you are, look at the policies of your state and see what, you know, where there can be tweaks and changes, and maybe look at the GFPP in LA, in New York City. There's some sort of good, good maps that kind of show how states kind of get to these policies and things that can be replicated throughout the nation. And if I could really just quickly address one question I saw earlier, because I meant to type it out, in terms of starting any kind of diet-related community-based intervention. I think someone had a question about diabetes, to how to address high diabetes rates in the community. I would say you have to look at it holistically. Like we looked at it, we worked with the hospitals, and we did a CSA, so folks had access to fresh and healthy food. We did a pay what you can option, so that folks can have agency over it, that it wasn't just, you know, another free food program. And then we also looked at it in terms of lifestyle medicine, in terms of lifestyle and helping people learn how to manage their diabetes, and also work with a nutritionist as well. So we looked at it in a holistic way, and I think that's the best way to do it. And also just talk to the community, ask them what they want and what they need. And, you know, we did focus groups to that end, and that's what I would suggest for that.
Yeah. Great. Thank you for that, Ray. We need to wrap, unfortunately. I mean, it's such we could keep talking about this. There's so many great ideas that people have put forth and helped us kind of crystallize our thinking. I want to thank everybody who helped put this together, Erin and Brian, and then, of course, the great panelists today of Ray, Urvashi, Jen, and Katie. Thank you so much for bringing all your clarity and intelligence to the table for us. I think everybody, you know, there's lots of hands clapping in the chat, and I applaud all of you for helping us go forward with more clarity on the topic. So thanks so much for being here and agreeing to participate. Brian?
Yeah, I just want to echo your gratitude, Peter. Fantastic conversation today. I gained a lot from this. Just a quick reminder that our Slow Food Live events are supported by our member base of more than 3,000 folks who are committed to good, clean, and fair food for all. So please, if you're not a member, consider becoming a member today to help support programming like this. You can also head to our website, slowfoodusa.org, to check out more than 60 other Slow Food Live conversations that we have in our archives. Again, thanks to everyone who joined in the room. Thanks for the really great conversations. And we look forward to the next time we gather and have these great chats about moving our food systems forward. So have a great afternoon, and we'll see you all soon.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.